Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Amy.
We both grew up with dads who drank too much.
So we are both adult children of alcoholics.
And we're here to talk about our experiences using honesty and some pretty dark humour. We'll be chatting to a variety of people affected by alcohol addiction.
Our dads were both called Steve and they're both dead now, which means we can finally have the conversations we've wanted to.
You had to go there already, didn't you?
We've had a lot of experiences between us and we are both really passionate about helping other people.
So let's sit back, relax and join us with Sarah and Amy, Children of Alcoholics podcast.
And today we're recording a special episode of Sarah and Amy, the Children of Alcoholics podcast. We've got a panel. It's very exciting. And we're recording this coming into COA week, which is the 9th, the 15th of February this year, and raises awareness for children of alcoholics worldwide. So Nacoa is a charity. Over the next week, we've got our annual lecture in Parliament to call on the government to reinstate strategy and funding for children affected by a parent's drinking, and lots of other events and opportunities to be involved, and lots of live panel events and discussions. So please do check our website and Nacoa social media all week to see how you can be involved. And today we are speaking with the lovely Arabella Byrne. Arabella is a Nacoa ambassador, a writer and a journalist, and she and her mum Julia have recently co-written a book called In the Blood, which is a memoir on mothers, daughters and addiction. And Arabella has got 2 daughters. And you'll see why this is relevant when you see where this conversation goes. And we also have Jen. Jen's our newest Nacoa ambassador and a huge passionate supporter of Nacoa. And most excitingly is expecting a baby in April of this year.
Very exciting.
So we're all here today, girls, as adult children of alcoholics, but also all as mums or mums to be. So I thought that'd be an interesting way to start this. So firstly, Arabella, you wrote a book with your mum talking about your own addictions and the effect your mum's addiction had on you. And generally, from my perspective, that just sounds like one hot mess and not one that I'm completely in awe of the fact that you were able to do this. And I've read the book and I loved it. And we've done a previous podcast particularly around that. But how did you get through it? I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I guess, it's a good question. And it's a question that actually more than any other question about the book is people say, how on earth were you able to do that? As a COA and being triggered by, my mother's addiction. And I would say that because we're both sober addicts in recovery, that we had a playbook for, we had quite a boundaried way of writing the book together. But that said, the structure of the book is that the chapters are kind of braided together. So we very often discuss the same events in different words. And one of the huge premises of the book was, how do you tell the same story but in different words? And I think, we did have moments where my mum would read the chapter that I had written and she'd say, I just absolutely don't think that that's fair on me. I don't think you're being fair on me. And I do think that this is something that COAs have all the time, is you feel like, I don't want to betray you. I don't want to betray you, but I also want you to know what happened. And I think it was finding, there was no balance in the book. And I think HarperCollins were really keen that we didn't censor ourselves or censor each other. And so that it has, I hope, the feel of a kind of live conversation of mother and daughter throughout the book itself, so that you get that crackle and that animus, that thing that animates any conversation that COAs have with their parents, whether they're in recovery or not.
It's 2 perspectives, isn't it? And as well, the way I look at it is, when my dad was drinking, he didn't remember how he'd behaved. Yeah. So having those conversations with him and saying, last night you were really unreasonable, you were really out of order. He didn't he didn't know what I was referring to. So they have no concept, I found with my dad especially, of what he'd actually put us through. So trying to have that conversation with him to say, actually, Dad, this was really difficult. And quite often he would say, I think you're being unfair, you're being unreasonable. It wasn't like that.
Yeah. And I guess the kind of standard COA conversation that you have with a parent is where they say, you know, I don't want to talk about this. And I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't want to talk about it. And I think that you should stop talking about this, full stop. We don't talk about it. We don't discuss it. Silence, you know.
Well, that's that whole thing, isn't it? You're being over dramatic. You're making a fuss.
Just going to say,
that's not what happened.
You're being hysterical. Yeah. I think that you need to stop this. And all my life, you know, certainly when I was growing up, it was always, and I laugh about this with my mum now, but you know, it was a thing that my mum said to me when I was growing up, and also my father was, you know, don't cry, just stop it, don't cry, please. It's, you know, you're embarrassing people. We don't want to talk about it.
Stop being sensitive.
Yeah, definitely. I guess it's really unusual, the conversations that I've been able to have with my mother, you know, in recovery. But I suppose one of the things that we wanted to do as two writers together when we wrote the book was to kind of throw memory into, you know, put it into question, really, because, you know, my mum said a lot that I can't remember. You know, I really can't remember what happened at that time, or, you know, and I think for her, that's always been a kind of defense. She's like, I can't remember, so I can't remember, you know. But I think, you know, it's, you want the answers, right?
I think sometimes the can't remember or the dismissal is because actually they do remember, but it's so deeply uncomfortable to confront what you've just been told about yourself. You know, no one loves having a mirror held up to themselves, particularly, I think, when there's an addiction involved.
Totally.
Denial, and then with denial comes invalidation, doesn't it?
And deflection.
Yeah. Jen, you've spoken really candidly to us on another podcast and just in general with the work that you do with Nacoa about the relationship you have with your mum and how exceptionally difficult that is. How has that, it's quite a difficult question really, but in terms of you being pregnant, that must have been really difficult as you reflect on that relationship, what you're going through, what you've been through in terms of becoming pregnant, and kind of what the future looks like.
Yeah, it's something that we thought about. I mean, we've been trying to have a child for a long time now, and thankfully we're there. But I think when it actually happened and we realised, okay, the baby was coming, it kind of made me sit there and look at the situation that we were in. And I don't want my child to be in a situation where they feel scared, concerned, worried about the environment that they're in. So it has been a real difficult process. I mean, I'm 6 months pregnant now, and for the last, I think since the minute I found out I was pregnant, my first thought was, how am I going to tell my mom? Because one, I didn't want to, because I knew the reaction I would get would be a false reaction. She's never really happy for me, but she pretends to be when she's having a good day. So I didn't want to tell her because I didn't think she deserved to know. And I also don't think she has the right to call herself a grandmother when actually she's not been a mother. And I know that's really difficult for probably a lot of people to understand. But when you've been through living in a situation with a mother who is an alcoholic and you're constantly being told it's your fault or you're to blame or you're the reason that I drink, you know, when you start then reflecting and looking at, well, I don't want my child to feel that way. And especially with some of the things that I've been through as an adult and my own mental health issues as an adult because of living in that environment, there's just no way that I want to put my child in that situation. So recently my husband and I have both made the decision together that we would remove my mum from the situation. So we are now at zero contact with her, which was a big thing to make the decision to do, because I've always been there and seen her or tried to see her when we can. And I think now it's not about me anymore. It's about protecting our baby. And it isn't just me either, it's my husband. He wants to protect his child as well.
I think that's really admirable, really brave.
Yeah.
And I think
it's hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And there was times where I wished I could have done that. There really were. But I think as well, it does get to a point, doesn't it? Especially because I think both of our parents, so your mum's alcohol dependent, my dad was alcohol dependent. There comes a time where unless they admit accountability, and unless they admit they want to get help, then you have to step away. You have to remove yourself from that situation and protect yourself.
Yeah.
And you're right, your family around that, because all the time we're preoccupied. I remember when I'd had my eldest daughter, and I remember looking at her thinking, how could he do this to me? I love her so much. How could he do this to me? Now I know that, addiction, it's far more complex than that. It runs far deeper than that. But my dad was so in denial and lacked a lot of accountability around his drinking that I just couldn't bring myself, I couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't understand it. And I loved this child so much, and I couldn't get why he couldn't do that for me. And then it made me think, am I not enough? Yeah. Do you not love me? And I do remember I was really preoccupied with looking after my dad and trying to control his drinking whilst I was a new mum. I remember compartmentalising. I compartmentalised times where I would allocate to worry about my dad.
Yeah.
I remember doing it. I remember thinking, right, today is about the baby. Today is about, we've got this to do. But at 3:00 today, when I ring him, that's when I'll worry about him. And then I'll put it to the back of my mind and I'll think about it the next day I spoke to him. And all that did was it manifested elsewhere as a different kind of anxiety. And that was my level of control, that I was trying to control a situation that I had no control over.
Yeah.
I think pregnancy is a really, I think as a COA, particularly because, you spend, I think it's very hard for us to leave that inner child. And suddenly, as a woman, you're literally incubating new life within you. Yeah. And, so it feels like this strange internalization has happened and you're like, the child is within me. And I have so much admiration. My parents were not in active addiction when I was pregnant. My father was dead and my mother was sober. But, to be able to set that boundary, I think is so important. And and you will, and the legacy of that, your child will experience that. I think it, even with my mother in recovery now though, I think I still have times when I think that's, you've overstepped, sobriety is not a magic ticket and it's not I will always be the child of an alcoholic, even though my mother is sober, and my children by extension are the children of alcoholics, even though, I was sober for a long time before they were born. But I do sometimes think, with my mum, I think, you've let me down again. And very quickly we're back in that place of, how it was, when my mother was drinking, and all those feelings of powerlessness and trying to control the situation they come flooding back. And, I've had to ask my mum to leave sometimes. And I've thought, this is not how I want it for my children, because you want it to be perfect, right? Yeah. Your time round.
Yeah.
It's your
it's
go.
Quite a tumultuous time anyway.
Yeah.
Pregnancy and having a new baby for lots of different reasons. But I remember a similar thing. I'd sort of look at my daughter and I think I would never do that to her. I would never, put her through that. And then actually, it sort of made me a little bit more sympathetic, where I just sort of thought, well, actually, I can see objectively that he didn't. When he was holding me as a newborn, this was not how he anticipated this story ending either. So it made me sort of weirdly more sympathetic, but also more angry with him at the same time. Yeah. So you can hold those two things, and we're never one thing or another. It's never 100% one feeling. And I did find it really confusing. And then, ultimately, he was a really crap grandparent. And he didn't want to be. And I see that. And he loved the idea of my children, but he didn't love the reality so much. They're noisy. They drop pizzas on the floor and all of those things. And I know kind of, after he died, people would say how proudly he spoke of both my brother and I and all of the 4 grandchildren, but we never heard that. he would remember their birthdays and he'd ask what they wanted, but he couldn't have told you what year they were in at school or what they were particularly interested in, or he never picked up the phone to them because he was in such an active addiction. So it's this weird thing of acknowledging that he did really love them, but his love didn't look the way that other people's love looked.
But I do think there's also something about hearing about how, about this love and this pride kind of from third parties. When my father died of alcoholism, lots of people said to me, "Oh, but he was so proud of you," and I could have wept. Why couldn't he? Why couldn't he have told me that? Because I spent such a long time, craving that approval, and it all feels, and I think this is a COA thing, it's just too little too late, isn't it? You get these, especially in death, and you think, if I'd known, could you not have told me that? Always feel so cheated.
I think it's other opinions as well. Like, since I decided to not have any contact with my mom, it's like, oh, you'll regret it, or she might get better for this reason. I said, but why has she never got better before? Why is it now having to take me to have a baby for her to potentially improve, or even have a chance of being sober? Because it shouldn't matter what. She should do it for herself also, but also she should do it for her own children, not because she's having a grandchild. And I think it's other people's comments that I think you make the decision, and in your own mind, in your own home, in your own head, and you think, okay, I'm going to do it. Then you do it, and then everybody else's opinion comes in, and it's always not okay.
But that's all that is. It's somebody else's opinion. It's somebody who isn't you, who hasn't had your experience, who doesn't have that parent. And they don't have the right to express an opinion to you because you're the one who has to, you've made that decision. It's the right decision for you. Yeah. You've made a choice to look after yourself and your baby and your husband. And that's the boundary that you've put in place. And actually, it's absolutely the right thing for you at this time. And that might, again, that might change.
It's not going to, it might not be forever. And I think if you try and outweigh it, which is what I'm trying to do in my head, it's like, well, if I continue having a relationship with her, my child's then going to be put in an environment that I don't want them to be in. If they don't have a relationship with her, then my child has got an opportunity to be in an environment where they feel safe and secure. So actually, who's missing out? Because if anything, we're gaining from not having her in that environment, or putting the child in that environment, because the child then won't feel like I have my whole life. And I'm from a long line of alcoholics. My mum's, I think, the 4th generation of alcoholics in my family. And since joining Nacoa, I'm the full stop. Yeah. And that's it. And it's not going to go any further. Amazing. It's really not. And we're the ones having the first grandchild, and it's not. I'm determined
in ending that generational trauma. Yeah. And how do you not know, or how do you know that you removing contact with your mum and going non-contact, that could be the rock bottom that she needs to get sober? So just because them people saying to you, oh, she needs this baby, it might help her get sober. No, it won't. Yeah. I don't believe that. And it didn't for my dad. And I don't think it has done for anybody that I've met that's been in this situation. They have to hit their rock bottom. They have to admit it to themselves. They have to admit accountability. And removing yourself from that situation, that could catapult her into admitting that, okay, I need help.
Yeah. And if 2-3 years down the line, she is completely sober and she gets better, great.
Yeah.
Great. But right now, it's not the time.
Yeah. Good for you.
So I've read a lot, but bear in mind I failed psychology A-levels, so there was but we read a lot about things like generational trauma and breaking the cycle, and they're all, we've just acknowledged it. And I think all of us have done that in our own different ways. How important was it to you, Arabella, to do that?
To break the cycle? Yeah. Well, I guess it's the most important thing in my life. But I think it's one of those things, if you knew the enormity of what you were trying to do, you probably wouldn't embark on it. And I see the moment, that I that I went to, my very first AA meeting when I was 26, and I just had no idea that my life was going to fork like that. And it wasn't, it's not just my life, it was my mother's life as well, because my mum got sober 9 months before me. And so suddenly like we're joining the dots of and trying to change the way we think about our family. But I guess, the experience of publishing the book together has been, some of it has been quite depressing, because, we've been told, various members of my mother's family have said, we don't want to talk about this. Why are you talking about it? Just put it away. It's and so I think, I guess what I'm trying to say is that generational trauma has a certain whiff about it. And some people find that, they find it sickening, and they don't, they're not interested. It's what you're trying to do is to bring out something that's really quite unsightly, and to change the way you look about, to change the way you think about it.
It's facing horrible truths that you don't want to come face to face with. That's why a lot of people rug sweep.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Oh, we've got some big old rugs in my family. Massive hand waving.
Not just
rugs.
the IKEA ones.
No, not the IKEA ones. I always thought kind of breaking the cycle for me. So when my dad died, I made the decision to stop drinking, because I definitely had a slightly edgy relationship with it by that point. So, and I remember thinking at the time, well, this is brilliant. I've done it. If I don't drink, then we're good, because I'm now not going to turn into my dad. Everything's brilliant. But my daughter is 15 and my son's almost 13. And actually sort of realised over about the past 12 months or so that I do still have quite a lot of work to do in terms of just the way I react to some things, or certain things that I find really difficult. And actually, it's a massive ongoing process. For me, it's not just a case of going, well, I don't drink, so I'm not my dad. Because actually, sometimes the way I was made to feel, or the way I was shut down, I can see that I also do that. I like to be very much in control. I like to have the final say. And that's not who I wanted to be as a parent. That's not who I am. But sometimes, when you're stressed or you're tired, and there's no handbook, this is the first time they've been 15 and 13, and it's the first time I've had a 15 and 13-year-old, and there's no one telling you what to do on any given day. But I can see that I have a real responsibility over the next few years to really kind of think about some of my reactions and responses to things, because I don't want them to then take that away.
And I think also probably like especially challenging for you is like this period where your own children might start drinking.
Well, this is my next question. This is my next question. Yeah, obviously I am I assume yours are all really young. If they're ahead of my two, then you've got problems. Yeah, so absolutely. And after my dad died, I did have some therapy for a few weeks, but I managed to, sort it all out in my head. And I wasn't in the right place. Like, we did this last session and she just said, "You're done, aren't you?" I was like, "Yeah, pretty much." And I'll go away and do this work on my own. And but she did say, from over the last 8 weeks, just bear in mind, I do think that when your children become a bit older, that might be something that you really struggle with, and it's okay to kind of come back at that point. And we're definitely not there. And I'm trying to be very neutral about it, because I fully acknowledge the fact that lots of people can kind of go and have a relationship with alcohol that doesn't develop into a problem. I acknowledge the fact that it's a cause of huge stress for me, but that also they're their own people and they've kind of got to go and make the mistakes that we all did to some extent. But it's horrible, and I will be terrified.
I think narrating this issue, even like, my daughter's 7. So I think, and I found this especially when the book came out and when she was asking, my mum and I what the book was about, and the natural, the the impulse was to say, it's not about addiction. It's about mothers and daughters. It's a book that Granny and I wrote together. And suddenly I realized that I was up against, something that is going to be very hard is saying to her, like mummy's an alcoholic and I can't drink. And so was grandpa. And so, and so all of this stuff. So I think even if they're pre the drinking age or pre-adolescent, I think it becomes quite difficult to, to find the words and the right words that aren't frightening. And, and she often says to me, what are you doing with, like, where am I today? And I guess it's about, finding words that aren't like alarmist or in any way kind of difficult to understand.
But I think those words are alarming and traumatic for us as COAs.
Yeah.
I think they don't need to be.
Yeah, totally.
They can just be, it is what it is. And, we made those decisions to move away from that. But I think those certain words, and you're right, comes with the stigma around drinking.
Yeah, which is a societal stigma that is very difficult for that. It's very difficult. I think if in terms of femininity and talking about addiction and femininity, I think one of the reasons I really wanted to write the book was because so many women in particular don't self-identify as alcoholics because they think, I'm a mother. How can these two labels possibly go together? So
I'll sort of say, talking about exams, for example, so my daughter will do her GCSEs next year, and I did okay in my GCSEs, but kind of the period of doing my A-levels was quite challenging for me. And so I'm not using it as an excuse, but I'm sort of saying, well, I really struggled at doing my A-levels, and actually I really struggled moving away to university, and these were the reasons. And that was sort of my story, without making it sound like a poor me story, because I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to explain why that was difficult, why it might be difficult for some people, and that it's okay for things to be difficult. And actually, if you can ask for help and receive help at that point, then you should do.
Open conversations with them are important, I think.
Yeah, I don't want them to feel sorry for me, but I also want to acknowledge sort of the facts of what it was like. So I try to be quite emotionless to some extent and quite factual and quite neutral about it because it happened, and not hide any of that, because I think that's the best way to open up those conversations.
Kids appreciate honesty as well, though.
They do, and they're a lot more switched on than what we give them credit for. Like, they know, they can sense things, and all we have to do is take ourselves back to their ages and remember how well we sensed something was off with our parents. So I do think, I've been really open with both my girls in an age appropriate way, but and who knows whether I did this right or whether I did it wrong. I don't know. I'm not a child psychologist or a professional. I'm a mum. But the way I explained it to my girls when they asked how Granddad died and asked about the work that I do, I very factually state, Granddad drank too much alcohol. He was an alcoholic. And they said, why? And I explained, because Granddad was very sad and worried a lot, but didn't feel like he could talk to anyone. So instead he drank. And I said to them, do you know how important it is that you talk to someone when you're feeling sad or when you're feeling worried? And they nod and they take it on board. And then that's all we say about it. And then my youngest will repeat back to me was, Granddad drank too much alcohol, didn't he? He should have spoken to somebody instead. He should have spoken about his feelings, shouldn't he? And then she'll start articulating herself to me and like how she's feeling. So, I don't know whether that's the right thing to do, whether that's the wrong thing to do, but it works for my girls understand it because they are quite switched on with things, and like they do overhear and they listen to what I'm talking about and the conversations that like I'll have with my husband or my sisters and my mum. And they're always listening. They're always there. Even if they're not in view, they're always in the background. They've got it's funny because they won't listen when you tell them to clean their room or do anything like that. But as soon as you're talking about something you shouldn't be talking about, they'll go, what did you say?
They know everything about the topic.
They do.
Yeah.
But I think there's age appropriate ways we can have those conversations. And I think trying to destigmatize it and not make it such a big taboo. So when they're older and they come face to face with it, and hopefully they don't, they'll have a better understanding. That's just my 2 pence worth though. Could be. I could be like, I'd probably have some child psychologist saying, you shouldn't do that.
I guess it's just normalising it. It happened.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I think those words, alcoholic or drinking too much, I think from a COA's perspective, they are triggering because you experienced it. But I think to a child or our children that we're trying to explain it to, they've never been in those environments. So it can just be, it doesn't need to be triggering or concerning because it just happened and they don't need to worry about that. But if they want to know, they can ask.
Yeah.
We can talk about it.
How do you feel about the word alcoholic?
There's definitely a stigma attached to it. And we were saying earlier, I think alcoholics don't even realize they're alcoholics. Yeah. I think even they think there's a stigma behind it. And because they don't sit on a park bench and drink out of a brown paper bag, they don't believe they're alcoholics because of what the image of that looks like is. And my mum would never admit it. She never will. She never has, never will. So she doesn't think she's an alcoholic, but we know she is. But I think it is what it is. It's the truth. It's about an individual who drinks too much.
I think also, I think as a, as a sober alcoholic myself, I think that it's, I have to be quite careful about the way I think about myself and the way I think about my parents, and very, and very often the two become, it can become this big soup of kind of everyone's a drunk and so was I. And so I think it's about kind of like separating out the things. I know for me that when I think about particularly my dad, I have to keep that compassion there, and think about, and the same applies to myself actually, but it's about, understanding that nobody chooses to be an alcoholic. Nobody chooses to live in that way. It's a terrible, terrible way to live. It's a terrible way to die. And I think it's about, it's like you were saying, Sarah, he my father worried, and instead of seeking appropriate help, he drank. And I think, I think about my dad's anxiety and how anxious he was as a person, and I think about the mornings before, in the morning before he'd had a drink, and I think about that hand shaking and all the rest of it, and not being able to light his cigarette because he couldn't use the light. And I think we need to keep, I think as COAs, sometimes it's important to remember that it's a terrible condition. It's a really awful illness, it really is a dreadful, I can attest to this, it's a dreadful way to exist because your world becomes so small,
I think as well, human emotions are complex, they're messy, life is hard. And I think when you become, especially for me, yes, I've had times and moments where I've been really angry with my dad and I've not understood it and I've stigmatized. But now as an adult, and the older I get and the more life experience I have, life's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. And my dad, the way I look at it, found a way to cope. He found a way to survive at the time. It wasn't the right way to do it. The right way to do it would have been to have sought some kind of professional help. But he'd never been equipped, and especially with men, and I don't want to generalize here and make it about men and women, but if we're being really honest, I think women find it easier sometimes to open up more than men do. There's such a huge stigma attached to men being sad or men worrying, and there's not so much resource there. And especially for my dad's generation, he didn't know how to say I need help. I feel depressed. I feel worried.
I think generationally it's huge.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, massive.
I mean, especially as a man. And I know, you see people come into recovery, you see men come into recovery of a certain age, and it's absolutely profound, this idea that you might be able to talk about who you are, and it's huge, right? But I think male mental health is, it's like becoming more in vogue.
Yeah.
And I think Caitlin Moran wrote that book about it. But I do think that when we're talking about, like fathers and daughters, and it's important to, I think that kind of like that gender sort of silencing that happens for men is massive.
Oh, and I think we've come a long way, but I think we've still got a long way to go. I think it's still there. I do think there is still a disparity there. But I do think life is messy, emotions are complex, and there are more than one thing that we can be addicted to. And I think addiction with anything follows a similar pattern. And it's tough. I think it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, my dad never openly sort of said I'm an alcoholic. I think he said, I think I might be an alcoholic. Yeah. But
weren't you Googling things though?
He had been Googling things, but he definitely wouldn't have admitted to sort of poor mental health or mental health issues. But then I personally find the term alcoholic quite reassuring. I don't know if that's quite the right word. It's a word that I've got no issue with using. I have no issue with identifying as the child of an alcoholic. And whilst my dad wouldn't have particularly attributed that label to himself out loud, for me to call my dad an alcoholic is absolutely fine. I mean, firstly, he's not here to argue with me. So, win. But also that's how I identify him. I felt quite disloyal. I think sort of after the first time I sort of said out loud, oh, my dad was an alcoholic, I felt really weird about it. And now clearly I feel absolutely fine. Because, but for me, to sort of say, oh, I had a parent who drank too much, or I had a parent who was
that's always felt to me a bit tinny.
Absolutely. Whereas the word alcoholic has got a certain gravitas. Yeah. It has a gravitas to it that acknowledges that actually this was all encompassing and it was damaging and it kind of wrecked everything. And I need that acknowledgement. So for me, I do think the terminology is important.
I've got some strong opinions around labels in the way that I actually think whatever we call it, it's going to mean the same thing. And I respect people's labels and how they want to identify. But for me, my biggest bugbear is that we only as a society seem to have a problem with labels around things that are deemed stigmatizing. Yeah. So we don't have a problem with saying, I have a migraine, or I have this physical illness, or I've broken a leg. But whenever it comes to anything that's deemed stigmatizing, I get it with ADHD. Stop putting a label on it. You don't need to label it. I'm like, but if I had something physically wrong with me, you wouldn't be telling me to not label a physical condition. It's because it has to do with our mental health or neurodiversity. All of a sudden there seems to be a big problem that we're applying a label to it, and that really irritates me because I think my dad was an alcoholic, exactly like you say, Arabella. Let's call it what it is. He was an alcoholic. I am a child of an alcoholic. That is how I identify. And no matter what word we want to dress it up with, the problem is the same. He was physically dependent on alcohol. It's killed him, and it had these detrimental effects on us growing up as children.
I find that with the school outreach projects that Nacoa are running. You go into a school and you say 1 in 5 children, statistically 1 in 5 children in this school have a parent who's drinking hazardously. And there is no support for them. And that's not a problem at school level. That's a problem at national, and government level, which is probably a whole other series of podcasts on its own. But essentially we're talking about 20% of children and young people, well, and by default adults as well, either have or had a parent who drank too much. If you had 20% of a school community or a college community whose parents had a physical illness, and I'm going to use cancer, which is not to kind of compare them, and I'm certainly not doing either one down. But if you worked in a school and 20% of your pupils had a parent living with cancer, think about the support and the help and the conversations that would be taking place.
Yep.
Whereas when you go in and say the same thing about addiction, there is
silence.
Nothing.
There's silence.
And because people don't know how to deal with it and have those.
Yeah, it's seen as a choice.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I think a lot of people think it's a choice for people And actually it can begin as a choice, but then can very quickly turn into an addiction, which ultimately is an illness.
Yeah. And that's like with any addiction, isn't it? It starts as a choice. There's a series of decisions you make leading up to that choice. And then it becomes a problem when it consumes you and your behaviour and your identity. I don't think we're really in control of a lot of things though, are we really? No. I've just accepted that I can't control anything. We can't even really, to a certain extent, control ourselves. We can't control our emotions. We can't control how we're going to react in certain situations. And I think surrendering that and accepting that we don't have that level of, obviously to an extent we do, but if we really think really deep into it, there is very little we do control or have any control over. But yeah,
it's choices.
It is choice. Yeah, it's choice. Yeah,
a lot of it is choices and what you decide to do and what path you decide to take, and if you decide to change or not.
Accountability, I think. Yeah. I think it's accepting accountability and putting your hands up and saying, "I've got a problem. I need help." Yeah. And until you can do that, then it's not going to improve and it's not going to change. No. And you're making a choice, then a conscious choice to not acknowledge. The one thing that I always argue when it comes to alcohol addiction, especially for our parents who are physically dependent on it, it does get to a point where they don't actually have a choice but to carry on drinking. I mean, they have a choice to seek support and help.
Yeah.
But at one point, my dad needed it like we need water. So that was an issue.
Yeah, it's not a good idea to just stop, is it?
But not many people know that. Yeah. That frustrates me actually. Which is suddenly stopping can kill you. And this is what frustrates me, is that we see on tobacco and cigarettes the warning signs and what it can do to your lungs and what it can do to the people around you and how it affects your internal organs. And there are massive warning labels attached to them. But with alcohol, we don't get a warning that it can cause physical dependence.
No, it comes with lights and sparkles and flavours.
And a tiny little QR code to drink aware at the back.
Yeah.
So there isn't that awareness that actually physical dependency can occur with this. And I think even when people like you, there's a lot of people that advocate for sobriety, and I think those people are wonderful, and it's great that we're talking about it. But I think there's a lot of people that just say, I just suddenly stopped drinking and I got sober. But no, don't. We have a responsibility to put it out there that this is what can happen. Seek medical support before you decide to stop drinking, because we all react differently. We all metabolize it differently. And I think certainly with my dad, what made my dad drunk, my mum sometimes could actually drink more than my dad. And not just that, a lot of people lie about their consumption. Yeah. My dad would lie about how much he'd been drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably physically dependent on it.
Let's be honest. Because actually, the minute you go to a doctor and because you think they're going to judge whatever you say, whether that's cigarettes or alcohol or the amount of pizza you eat, you feel like, I should be doing better. And I guess that's what we all feel, whether it's about how much we're drinking or what sort of parent we'd be. Ultimately, we're all just works in progress.
It's funny, actually. I think since I joined Nacoa, I think on multiple podcasts and people who ask questions, it's always that one that comes up for me is when you say to someone you don't drink, they go, why? Why don't you stop drinking? Or why don't you drink? And I've had that through my pregnancy. Ness is they're asking me how much alcohol do you drink? And I was like, none. They're like, really?
What, whilst you're pregnant?
No, before I was pregnant. Like they were asking me like how much I drank generally. And I was like, I don't drink. And they're like, what? Like they were even surprised. I was like, why is that such a shock to everybody? Like surely it's a good thing medically. It really surprises me how people are taken aback by.
It almost offends people.
Yeah. Like, what do you mean you don't drink? Nothing? I was like, no. I'm like, oh.
I mean, this is like people are endlessly offended when you don't drink in this country.
Because you hold a mirror up to them.
Yeah. I think in America,
I
found it to be different in America.
Yeah.
There was like a different narrative around sobriety, and AA was founded in America, and they have like a different kind of conception of it. But I think in this country, I totally...
Yeah.
Everything's different in America now.
Yeah.
But again, that's a whole other podcast.
Oh, don't get me started.
I think we probably better wrap up before I fall down a rabbit hole I can never climb out of.
Ladies, it's been such a pleasure to have you both on, and thank you so much for sharing and talking to us.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Always a pleasure.